Welcome to Early Returns, hosted by Jan Baran, a partner of Holtzman Vogel. This podcast examines law and politics and seeks insights from political players in elections, lobbying, media, and the law. Now, let's join our host, Jan Baran.
Welcome back to Early Returns, a podcast about law and politics. I'm your host, Jan Baran. Our producer is Jody Mayer Piazza. Today is the beginning of the 5th season of Early Returns. Thank you all for listening and supporting this program. Each year, I've been fortunate to have as my first guest a commissioner from the Federal Election Commission. As you probably know, the FEC is composed of 6 commissioners, 3 from each major political party. The agency, however, needs at least 4 commissioners to have meetings or to approve any major action, such as an investigation or to issue an advisory opinion. Our first episode was conducted after COVID, and the FEC had been short of a quorum for almost a year, back in 2020. Our first guest then was Commissioner Alan Dickerson, who shared with us what it was like getting confirmed during COVID and what the FEC had to confront in its backlog due to the shortage of commissioners. Well, today we're going to continue our tradition by having a commissioner. In fact, we're going to have the entire current FEC here. That's because, once again, the FEC lacks a quorum. There were 3 commissioners who departed the FEC and 1 who was terminated in the past year. So we are now down to my guests, who are the 2 surviving commissioners at the FEC. One of them, Shana Broussard, was confirmed during COVID, just like Commissioner Dickerson, back in December of 2020. She was the chair of the FEC that following year and has that title today. Prior to being a commissioner, Shana Broussard worked at the FEC, first as an enforcement attorney and then as counsel to a commissioner. In short, she's been at the commission for 15 years, either as a commissioner or as a staffer. She's a graduate of Dillard University and Southern University Law Center. Our other guest is Commissioner Dara Lindenbaum. Dara has been an FEC commissioner for 3 years. She was a guest on Early Returns back in 2024 when she was chairman. Previously, Commissioner Lindenbaum was a partner at an election law boutique law firm, and before that was a lawyer at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. Dara is a graduate of Northeastern University and the George Washington University Law School. Shana and Dara, thank you both for being here today.
Well, thank you very much for having us. I like the fact that we have the tag teaming available with Dara today, so I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Great. These are interesting times, but I can say that the times have been interesting probably during all of your time at the FEC. It just keeps changing almost every year. But as I mentioned in my introduction, Chair Broussard, you have been a commissioner for 5 years. Am I correct that you were on the staff there in various capacities for 10 years before that?
Yes, I joined the FEC in 2008 as a staff attorney and worked there for, I believe it's 7 or 8 years. And then I was invited to join the office of former Commissioner Stephen Walther, as one of his counsel. And that was a great opportunity to work with him, to work with an independent. So that was a different perspective. And then I became a commissioner in December of 2020.
And you arrived with Commissioner Dickerson and I believe another new commissioner, and you arrived at an agency that really had been out of business, or at least people would say it had been out of business. So we're going to discuss why the commission is not out of business just because it lacks a quorum for a year. And so what was it like going through that exercise of getting the job, being confirmed during COVID, and all of a sudden, what were you faced with, and what was that first year like?
Well, the previous commissioner, the 3 of us came in at one time. It was myself, Commissioner Dickerson, and Commissioner Cooksey. So the commission went from having more or less 2 people at that time to then having a full slate, and Commissioner Walther was there still, a full slate. So I went from 1 minute working for Commissioner Walther to being his colleague. That was a change in and of itself. And then I After 1 week on the commission, I was confirmed and nominated and voted to be the chair of the commission. So that's another kind of surprise that happened during that time. But when we became a full commission in 2021, we were in a bit of a triage kind of moment during that time period because we were in the midst of COVID. We hadn't had a quorum for approximately 19 months altogether when you look at that time period. And we were facing 450 matters on the enforcement docket, with much of those things looking at statute of limitations. So it required a concerted effort on the part of myself, my colleagues, to work in a bipartisan nature for us to triage those matters. And I'm proud to say that by the end of the year, we had reduced that enforcement backlog by 60%. But that was pretty unique times because we were in the midst of COVID. But I can say that despite the fact that we were in the midst of COVID and we might have been teleworking at that time, we were able to all group together to work long hours to push through some pretty long agendas. And I'm proud of the work that everyone was able to accomplish.
Well, I think it's generally recognized that you guys did a great job cleaning up a backlog and getting the commission back functioning and doing its job, particularly in the aftermath of 2020 election. Now, Commissioner Lindenbaum, you arrived at FEC 3 years ago after being in private practice, basically, and you were observing the FEC from the outside as opposed to the inside, like Commissioner Broussard. What did you learn from the inside at the FEC once you got there that you didn't know or may have surprised you once you became a commissioner?
It was a very big change. There were a number of things that I had to deal with. Some of it was coming from private practice into government. Some of it was having clients in private practice who are scrappy and you tell them to do something and 10 minutes later it's done. And compared to government where it moves slow and you run into a wall. And when you want to do something, I ran into a lot of walls and I certainly banged my head on a lot of tables, literally trying to get things done. But I think one of the biggest things that both surprised and aggravated me was our very tiny budget. It is something that we still have to deal with now. Part of the problem was that for a decade, the commission wasn't even agreeing to ask for more money from Congress. So you don't get what you don't ask for. So that wasn't happening. So we started at such a low point. And that involved some headbanging on my part when I understood that. But to me, it was pretty amazing to see how small our budget is, how it hadn't gone up, yet the number of financial transactions that happen now has gone through the roof through all this conduit contributions through ActBlue and WinRed. And our filing system that everybody relies on works. And to me, that is a testament to our incredible staff who could have thrown their hands in the air a long time ago and said, this is impossible to deal without more people, but they have kept this thing running. And I've worked in states where the filing system wasn't reliable. Like in Georgia, I had a client that broke the system because her returns were so big and then broke it again the next time because they still didn't expand it enough to get her files in. And people can rely on our system when they submit their campaign finance reports. And that's a big deal. And our staff is able to do it. We should have a lot more money in our budget, and we are fighting for more money in our budget, but it still is surprising to me how good they are.
Well, do you think that the Georgia system that you referred to had a bigger budget than you did?
Georgia.
How large is the FEC? How many staffers do you have?
Well, if I could, Dara, the reason why I want to make sure I answer this, because I want people to know what Dara said about the budget, and then I want to correlate that to the number of people that are working here. And I think that's really a great tag along for the two. We have 249 people working in this agency, 249 people that are dealing with not millions, but billions of dollars in transactions, and with a budget that has been stalled for, when you kind of consider it over the cost of 10 years, as Dara mentioned, that has been stagnant, and they have been able to do amazing work. And so I think this is something that Dara and I both agree with, is that I'm going to use a really poor analogy, Jan, is like we're working with sticks and glue. And with sticks and glue, they're still amazing in being able to get this stuff. I always like to give praise to the staff because that's a lot of work that they have to accomplish with limited resources. And I think that the FEC is an example of government efficiency, because if we can accomplish this with the budget that we're at, just think of how a greater service that we could provide to the public if we had the funds that we need to go in our budget.
Well, what would be different if you had more money?
I think you can update the IT systems. I think that where we have been working on, Dara's going to do it better than I, because working on the FEC file system that the public relies on, when you have major filing dates and you have large filers that come in, there is a fear that this might shut down. And because of the number of filings that are coming in, it then requires the double time of staff to get this done. And the programming, it's stale, it's old, it's not up to date as to what could be better resources out there. So while this is accomplishing, we still need to move into newer resources. We need to get that cloud work done so that it becomes a better resource for the staff. So we're not resource for the staff, but better resource for the public. So there's less opportunities for us to be on the phone helping them fix FEC file and actually helping them to get these materials filed and get the public available to see what has been filed and to promote the transparency that goes behind the whole reason of the agency.
So it sounds like it would be good for Congress to give you a little more money to make sure the system doesn't break down. And of course, one of the most important roles of the Federal Election Commission is to accept and process all of this data about how money is being raised and spent in our election systems. And that continues now. I've mentioned that the Commission doesn't have a quorum. There's only two of you left. There are certain things you cannot do, and we'll get into that in a moment. But what is it that you are doing currently, what that's going on? And when your 249 staff are working at something, they might not be issuing or drafting advisory opinions, but what's going on at the Commission? What is it that the public ought to know is still happening for their benefit?
So we are still doing quite a bit. There are things that we aren't doing, right? As you said, we're not responding to advisory opinions. We are not adjudicating cases at the commissioner level. However, in our general counsel's office, they are processing complaints that are coming in. And to me, I think that's incredibly critical. When the quorum ended the last time, there was a huge backlog of cases at both the general counsel's level and also at the commissioner level. What we want to happen is the general counsel's office to have gone through these cases and have the backlog not be at their level, but be at our level, so that it's on us as commissioners to go in and tackle that together and not have to work with them. Now, our general counsel's office has done a really great job in the last 2 years. Or a year before we lost the quorum, they really started to process complaints much faster. They shortened how they were writing up their reports. So when they were recommending a no reason to believe recommendation, they weren't spending 100 pages on it, right? That's not efficient. They were really working things through and getting them up pretty fast. And because of that, when we lost the quorum, we didn't have a huge backlog. And that started us off in a much better position than they were in the last time. So again, our general counsel's office is still processing those complaints as they're coming in. They're just not going anywhere once they get to our level.
Just for the benefit of our listeners, we should explain that the process at the Commission is that anybody can file a complaint, and the Commission can also start a so-called matter under review, an investigation on its own. And of course, to do something with an investigation, it takes a Commission vote. So we have really two types of situations with respect to internal FEC cases. We have complaints that may have come in that have not been reviewed by the Commission because it doesn't have enough commissioners to review them and make a decision what to do, whether to dismiss the complaint or to start an investigation. But you also have a lot of cases that were started before you lost the quorum. How many cases do you think had been open before you lost your quorum?
If I could, I think a way for us to phrase it is that one, and I want to invite your audience, is that our quarterly reports for the Enforcement Division are available on our website. So if you would like to see the most recent data, I think the December report is going to be the most recent data. I can tell you that we currently have 190, I believe is the right number of matters. Compare that difference to where we are right now, 190 to being at 450 a couple of years ago. That's an example of the efficiencies that Dara was mentioning that we have put in place that have made everything move so much better in the agency, which goes back to one of the primary concerns that Dara and I both share, is to make sure that we're giving good customer service to the public. So it moves quicker. But in addition to the reports, the MERS that you mentioned, there's that whole other section that we're still receiving receiving reports. We're still doing the filings. We're still giving that up on IT. As I'm sure your audience knows that January 31st is a big filing date that's coming up. We're going to have our compliance analysts and RAD analysts that are going to be available to answer all your questions on the phone. So that day-to-day work is happening. That still happens at this agency, and we've got those great people down there that are ready to do it. But Dara and I have stressed to everybody, and wherever we're at and together, I feel like we're tag teaming and telling people, the backlog is not downstairs. It's not in compliance. It's nowhere else. A backlog is up there with us. So what that means is we're still looking at these cases. We might be entering our votes, but you're right. We don't have a minimum of 4 people to move it on to the next level. And let's remind people, it's not always an RTB. Sometimes it's a dismiss. And we want to get all of these things processed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and again, for our listeners, an RTB is a finding by the commissioners. There's reason to believe that there's enough here to investigate after you receive a complaint and the commission votes on it. But with respect to the cases, the internal matters, and I want to get back to all the data that's being done, but on the investigative side, the cases that were open and started, the 190 or so cases, I believe is what the number is, the staff is still conducting investigations, I assume, or are they? I mean,
well, we can break that down even further. There's only 2 matters that are in investigation, and that's on that chart that's public. So I don't want anyone thinking that when we say 190, that we are out here have 190 matters. What is happening is there's been a complaint, there have been a response. Our staff in the Office of General Counsel Enforcement have reviewed that information, done their legal analysis, and they've drafted a report. There are 190 reports that are waiting for Dara and I, and at minimum 2 other commissioners to join us so that we can make a decision whether the next stages are.
Yeah, I understand that. And that's with respect to the things that haven't been started. But in addition to that, you have, don't you, matters that have started or not, that are open, that are being investigated after a commission
2
vote?
matters.
2, just 2. Oh, so you guys are really up. This is what I was trying to understand myself, which is that really you're up to date in terms of how you handled cases that the prior commissioners said, well, we ought to take a look at this and do an investigation. There are only 2 of those. Really, the backlog now is complaints or issues that the commissioners, once we have a quorum, have to take a look at to decide whether to dismiss them or whether to start an investigation. So that's pretty good. That means that you're not going to be in the same position, hopefully, once you get colleagues to take a look at all of this, to move forward and to do so more quickly. So that's terrific. Now, with respect to advisor opinions, I assume people have stopped asking for an advisor opinion once they know that they're not going to get an answer. But I can see some hesitance on that. How many requests have you had that are just hanging out there?
So that gets a little different for us because policies quarterly reports are not published. But I can tell you from a general number perspective of how many there are, there's 13. So we have 13 requests, but we have to remember, and your audience has to remember, advisory opinions have to go through a stage where when you submit it, it's in this pre-AOR stage. a pre-advisory opinion request where the staff has to decide if it is a legitimate matter for advisory opinion. So your public can be aware there's 13 of those things. But this is an example of why Dara and I want to get this place fully back. And I feel like it's our obligation when we're in front of your audience to stress that we are fully in support of having a quorum restored so that we can get back to the full business of everything we're doing, because those 13 people have a right to know if there's something legitimate for us to be able to give them an answer to their legal issues.
Yeah, especially in 2026, which is an election year. So here we are in January, and elections are just 9 months, 10 months away. So people need to have some guidance, and hopefully that will occur soon. Now, with respect to all the data and processing of reports, that to me is probably the most important function of the Federal Election Commission. You get all that data. You get all those reports. It's all, by and large, electronic now. You download it. It's almost immediately available to the public. It's on your website. Hopefully, you have enough money to keep functioning your website for all that data. How is that going? Is that running smoothly? How would somebody in the public, how would a listener be able to use all that information that you have?
So our system is quite good because the staff is putting their all into it. The things they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis to block and tackle, to keep the thing running, again, on the shoestring, is pretty incredible, but we're confident in it. I'm confident in it because I'm confident in them. We should also mention, though, going back for a minute, that when we talk about the budget and that we have around 250 people, 10 years ago, there were 325, 35. That's one of our problems. We have significantly less people that are doing significantly more. And because we have less people, cases take longer, which in my opinion doesn't benefit anybody. You know, if somebody didn't violate the law, they should get their dismissal quickly, right? And they want to be able to call our reports analysis division and find out, how do I do this weird filing? We have our analysts that are always there for them. So I think that, again, our people are making it work with everything that they have. And the system, though, to poke your head around is really quite easy. There are lots of different ways to filter information to see donor names and how many people gave to this candidate or that candidate and sort them in lots of different ways. Now, I'll do a little bit of a plug here and say that I actually think our system should be changed, and I'm really pushing Congress for this change. I think in this day and age, there is absolutely no reason that we should make all of the information that we make public. I don't think that we should be making public people's street name and street number. I don't think there's a public benefit in that when we weigh the harms. Somebody gives a $10 contribution and has their whole address out there. They haven't moved 5 years from now. If somebody wants to look them up, they shouldn't be able to know where they live just because they made a $10 contribution. This requires a change by Congress. I don't think it's a big lift, and I think it protects everybody. That's an easy change, I think, but our system is very easy to use.
I also want to add to what Dara is saying, Jan, excuse me for interrupting you, is that is a part of a legislative recommendation. So what even goes further to what Dara is saying is one, the privacy concerns that you're talking about, but also this is a bipartisan agreement. We made a legislative recommendation that says that, and I'm so glad that she continues to push that issue because it's something that all of us agreed upon. And so I really do agree with Dara and hope that it's taken to heart and that there are some regulations in place to change that. If I were going to plug my own thing, I hope that there's some changes to the foreign ballot initiatives. Overall agreement that we do not believe that foreign nationals should have involvement in how we handle our elections. It's a bipartisan issue. So while if we're going to do a tag team, which Dara and I do really well, we're going to tag team on contributor information. I hope we can also agree, Dara, to tag team on the foreign national ballot initiatives. So I like how you did that. So I wanted to make sure I got a plug in there as well.
Let me just one up Shana on this and just say that I don't know if this is a one up. I'll add to and boost you on this and say that Shana had to take a hard vote before I got there on foreign nationals and this very issue. And because the law is very clear and the policy is bad, but the law is clear. And because of that, she's put this through and we made this legislative recommendation that's very easy and very straightforward and really has bipartisan support. So let's just get it done.
All right. Well, just to give our listeners a little more background here and context, what Shana and Dara are referring to is the federal law that prohibits foreign nationals from participating in elections, which to date has been interpreted as participation in elections for candidates. Now, separate from candidate elections, a lot of states have elections for constitutional amendments and ballot issues. And the law currently would allow a foreign national to participate, not by a voting, but by contributing to ballot committees that engage in these types of campaigns. So the recommendation here, which I've heard loud and clear, is that Congress ought to amend the law to extend the ban on foreign contributions to candidates, to extend it to contributions to other types of elections, such as state constitutional amendments and state ballot questions. So that's what this discussion was about, and I think our audience can feel free to share their opinions with both Dara and Shana. Your email addresses are on the FEC website, so there might be some fan mail on that one.
Hey, can I add one more thing to plug here? Because I can't let anything get away without our final plug that I know we agree on. And that is on commissioner salaries and our staff salaries. Some people are uncomfortable talking about money. After working for clients who are asking for money all the time, I am not uncomfortable asking for money and talking about money. Political appointees, like us commissioners, have our salaries frozen in 2013. So while the cost of living increases go up, people in the executive schedule level 4, like we are, the salary has been the exact same thing since 2013.
And that would be true of any government employee at that level. Is that correct?
Yes, unless they've been exempted. That's right. And if we want to bring in and recruit good people here, we need to increase the salary. You want people with experience, and this should be across the board government. It's not very much money we're talking about. It is not even a rounding error for government funding. It wouldn't change our budget one iota, but it is critical that commissioners, our agency, and especially at the other independent agencies that are very different than the executive agencies, although we'll see how different that is when some of these cases come down, but it's absolutely critical. It's also critical for the staff. So, I'll add, our inspector general has said that this is a critical management issue for us. Our staff makes significantly more money than we do. On top of that, our general counsel is an acting general counsel, and we have a staff director that has 2 different roles. And part of the main reason for this is because their salaries are also significantly lower than they should be. So this is also a joint recommendation that the commission has made to increase those.
And I agree. Let me add to that. And I always thank Dara for that, because she's right. You do feel uncomfortable talking about money, but if you ask not, you have not, is the phrase goes. But it also impacts our ability to hire, because if the salaries are frozen for the staff director and the general counsel, when we put these positions out, we're not able to get the creme de la creme of the candidates that want to come join this, because they can make far more in a private sector. And while I have a career that's built on public service, everybody else is not interested in joining the public service if it's going to significantly impact their households.
Well, in addition to all that continues to be done at the commission with respect to enforcement and processing and accepting campaign finance data, making all that available to the public, let me ask you a question with respect to one other aspect of the commission, which is court litigation. You have court cases that are pending, that were pending when you lost your quorum. What has happened to those cases? Obviously, you can't, as commissioners, couldn't, if you decided to, file a case, but people file cases against you. And also, you had cases that were pending when you lost a quorum. So how does this lack of a quorum affect litigation by the commission?
I'd say a lot and not at all at the same time. Depends on what the case is. So the cases that we've already authorized to defend, our litigation team is still defending. I'll add, our litigation team is very small. They really, they are pushed to the limits and they do it. And I am impressed every minute of every day with that. So we have those cases that they're already in the middle of it and going with. However, I'll add another batch of cases there. There are some cases that when we are sued on them, there's no vote to defend the agency. It's an automatic if one of our statutes is attacked, other elements like that. However, there's this group of A8 cases where people can sue the FEC if we have taken more than 120 days to adjudicate a enforcement matter. And this has been a big issue recently and has had some controversy where cases weren't closed and therefore groups could come and sue the agency. Well, the issue now is that we are set up here for these A8 cases when we don't have a quorum because on one hand, we can't close cases. So it's been, more than 120 days. So any complaint that has been filed since we've lost the quorum, they can certainly go ahead and sue the agency and there's nothing we can do about it.
Well, what do the courts do about it? Obviously, the courts are aware. I assume your lawyers go to court and say, we represent the FEC or not? Do they not go to court?
What we did do is that we put a policy in place that when we are without a quorum, that we do give the litigation division agency to be able to go to the court to file into the court to say the FEC is without a quorum. So they cannot authorize defending this. They cannot authorize any actions. Hello, court, please do what you will with this information. And then there are instances that the court may give us that latitude to say, we'll check back in a couple of days. Let's do a status conference in a certain period of time. But it is up to the individual courts and how they will proceed with it.
Right. So, has any court recognized this situation and said, well, we're going to proceed with this case. We're going to let the plaintiffs sue the commission. The commission can't even represent itself if they sue the commission. Has any court said, go ahead and conduct a lawsuit, or have they said, let's hold everything and see what happens with the quorum?
I want to say I'm aware that most courts have given, I don't want to be a final on this, but what I do say is in the ones that come to mind, the court has given a further extension to that status conference and says, we're going to come back in, I'm not sure the exact date, but let's say another 120 days or so.
So, all right. So with those types of cases, the courts seem to say, we're going to take a time out and see what happens with the commission. Is that correct?
I think that the only case A8 case that's come in, I believe, is one that's fairly recent, and we haven't gotten to that point there. So I think there's only been one that's been filed in, the last month or two, but the floodgates are now open and it hurts everybody because if we have to defend this and we can't defend it, oftentimes somebody's going to have to come in, a campaign or a PAC, they're going to have to spend their own funds to defend this case and defend the FEC in absentia. And that hurts all the political players. So my hope is that will push some nominees.
Well, let's talk about the status of nominations. There have been no nominations to replace any of the 4 commissioners who have left the commission. What do you hear? Any movement there? I mean, you might be the last ones. I recognize that, but I thought I'd just ask you, what do you know?
I think it's a more than fair question. And for me, the answer is I have heard nothing, but it doesn't disregard what I said earlier, that I am eager for a quorum to be restored. And if I get my own little platform, like Dara and I were giving our wish list, our FEC Christmas list is what I would call it, what we wanted. I want a quorum restored because there's so much more work for us to do. And I think that this commission, the last group that we have shown a concerted effort to work together, to go across the aisle, to make hard decisions that are not always what you want, but are in the efforts of moving forward in guidance to the public.
And, there are 3 names that have been made public in news articles. And I will say that I know all 3, and all 3 are fantastic and would be fantastic additions to the commission. I hope we get future colleagues on both sides of the aisle that will make efforts to work and find ways that we can agree on. Everybody has their thing. The thing they are passionate about, that is their thing. And we get that. And sometimes you try to convince people. Sometimes that that's not going to happen. But then it's all the other things that you can work and try to find commonality on. And I'm quite confident that the 3 names that have been out there, that they're all three of those people can all work in that way. And I think would be an advantage to everybody. So my hope is that we get nominees soon.
And of the three names, how many are Republican, how many are Democrat?
The three names in that article are 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat.
Okay.
And this was before Commissioner Traynor left.
Okay. And I should have mentioned at some point in this conversation that you two are both Democrats. So it kind of makes you unique in the sense that to the extent that there is an agency that's controlled by the Democrats, although you're not entirely in control, you're the one agency that, in the Trump administration that would have that distinction. And there can be no more than 3 from one party. So if these 3 nominees that have been mentioned in the news are actually nominated and then confirmed by the Senate, which is required, then you would have a quorum, although you would still be missing 1 commissioner, and you would be composed of 2 Republicans and 3 Democrats. But again, all 4 votes would be required to do anything substantively.
On that note, I think we certainly understand the unique position we're in here. This agency was designed to be bipartisan, and we are doing everything we can to make sure that we are bending over backwards to make sure that we're informing everybody of things. So, when there are things that we would normally advise or let the oversight committees know, we make absolutely sure that we are letting both the majority and the minority know about that. And we are really trying to be as absolutely transparent as possible and really hoping we get nominees.
Well, this is one of the many reasons that thank you both for being here, and your presence and your discussion here demonstrates your transparency and the manner in which the commission is operating under the current circumstances. And speaking of the commission, let me ask you both, based on your experience and perspectives, which are very interesting and varied, what do you think of the way the commission is composed? I mean, there are legislative proposals to change all this, not to have an even number of commissioners. Do you have any thoughts on all of that? And if so, would you be willing to share it with me and the audience?
Yes, I have very strong thoughts in it. And I think what people are going to be surprised is I think that the way that the commission is comprised with 3 and 3 is the appropriate way that it should be done, is because what this does is this forces a bipartisan nature, which is the very intention of the agency. I think if you make it, and some good government groups out there are not going to like that, but I think if you make it a 5, then you take the risk of some type of weaponization. And what the whole point of this agency is that it is supposed to be a bipartisan effort to resolve it. As I mentioned earlier, any changes that we've done by the regulatory process in the last 4 years have been bipartisan, and they have been incremental. And I believe that a little change is better than no change at all. And so that is why I think that the heart of this agency, the 3-3, does have its conflicts. It does have its problems, and people can call us the toothless and everything else. But what we do get right is when we come together and we get at least 4, and that forces you to find that 4th vote. So if it's the 3 Democrats, we have to get a Republican and vice versa. I think that's the ultimate, the best decision that could be for this agency and to keep it moving forward in the right direction. So I'm firmly in favor of a 6 commission with 3 and 3. Or we're at a desperate stage now, so I'll take 4 with 2 and 2, but I want bipartisan effort.
Well, yeah, and it can be unanimous. It can be 3 and 2 of either party. Shana, thank you for that perspective. And Dara, what's your thought on this?
Wholeheartedly agree. And I can say I've worked in states where there has been a weaponized ethics commission where the parties could not compete on the same level because you couldn't trust you weren't going to be investigated for something your opponent was. Nobody wants to operate in that system. And I think that this is absolutely the right way to do it. I will say though, when there were only 4 of us, it was significantly easier to just deal with 4 people instead of 6 people. So maybe, you go down to, you need 3 votes and you have 4 people, but I don't need that. I think 3 and 3 is good. You get lots of ideas, you get lots of people, but sometimes it's more efficient, which is 4.
Well, you wouldn't want to lose any more of your budget by going down to 4 commissioners, right?
That's true. Yeah, more people with more contacts and more ways to ask for more things. Love it. And more experience, right? I think one of the really great things about the like last cohort is that we all had very different experiences. We came from different places and had different backgrounds in what we were doing. And we all brought something to the conversations we were having. And that, I think, especially me and Shana, if you just like think about it, Shana's been a prosecutor. She's worked in the building. She knows how the enforcement works and the inner workings and has relationships in the building. I rely so heavily on so much of that experience and that like mindset that she has here. And I think she relies on me for something.
And you didn't give me a chance to say that because no, I completely agree. And Dara, starting it off, I want to make sure I finish this. I have learned so much from someone who has been out there working with clients because there is an experience that I do not have. I do not have an experience of working directly with a campaign. So what I do is I say, can you explain this to me from a perspective of someone that outside? And I take to heart what's being said because one, I have a wealth of experience and I consider myself my own little expert, but I'm not an expert what happens outside. And all I can do is learn. And so I've been privileged to learn from Dara. So I've enjoyed working with her.
Well, each commissioner has a term of office of 6 years. The statute says that the commissioners can serve until they are replaced, although there is an issue as to what the power of the president is. We saw last year that President Trump fired one of the commissioners. Of course, that commissioner was on the commission for 22 years, notwithstanding the fact that the term in the statute is 6 years. I don't know what's going to happen going forward, and none of us do, and how these legal cases will be resolved at the Supreme Court regarding the power of the president to fire agency officials. But you two are commissioners. You two have terms of office. When does your respective term of office supposedly end?
I'll go first. So commissioners serve, as you know, on staggered 6-year terms. I will say that my technical term ended in April of 23. Trey Traynor and I were kind of technically on that same track together. Trey just left. So technically I am on an expired term, but the statute and the regulations say that we can serve into the time that another person has been confirmed. So that's simply the answer to your question.
Mm-hmm.
And my term ends April 2027.
So you've got some measure of continued security here.
I'd say none, actually, which is not fun, especially when you have, financial obligations and family to support. But I don't have any illusions to any kind of security, although at this point in this environment, nobody does anywhere. So I guess that kind of puts me with the general population as well.
Well, my follow-up question to both of you was that neither of you have any intention currently of stepping down, regardless.
No, absolutely. For me, I have to say this, is that, as Dara said, and I'll say, it's hard to say what the future will bring. That's obvious. I always note to individuals that I was nominated by President Trump, and I hope that gives some weight. But I will say that the FEC is my home, and it's been my home since 2008. But I recognize for the audiences, I have not been a commissioner, folks, since 2008. I have been a commissioner since December of 2020.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all that clarity. And let me just say this for the sake of the Early Returns podcast, I'm glad to hear that Dara's term at least continues until 27, and that we will have potentially the opportunity of guaranteeing at least one commissioner for next year's first podcast. How's that?
You can book it.
Let me ask you, I'm really winding up here. I'm going to ask you two questions. One is, what is it that you think is the most important thing about the FEC that the public should know and maybe doesn't know after all of our discussion here about what you're doing?
We only do campaign finance. The number of people that don't know that, some of the people that should know that, don't. But we only deal with the money in federal elections. We don't deal with the election processes. We don't deal with the voting. We don't deal with the counting of the votes. We don't deal with the equipment. We only deal with the money and how it's raised, spent, all of that.
That's it. The first thing, your audience would be amazed at how many people that reached out to us to talk about election administrations and voting rights and things like that. And the way I simply break it down to the audience that is not probably not listening to this podcast, is that we're the closest thing the federal government has to follow the money in federal campaigns. Like, that's it. But I'm not here for voting. I cannot tell you about election administration. I can direct you to the EAC and they can give you some of those answers. And I think that's a big thing too. People conflate a lot of the work that we do with EAC. And while it might have been an offspring from the agency a long time ago, it's a different body of work.
And that would be the Election Administration
Yes, I'm sorry.
Commission.
I forgot
That's
I'm
all
speaking
right.
in acronyms.
And in fact, we've had a commissioner from the Election Administration Commission on this podcast, and he makes the same point. He says, yes, we can only give suggestions and advice, and we have certain responsibilities regarding the administration of elections, but we don't run the elections either, and we have nothing to do with campaign finance. That's the Federal Election Commission. Well, if any of our listeners wanted to learn more about the FEC and campaign finance regulation, do you have any suggestions where they ought to go, what they ought to read?
I would go to our website. We have, in the most recent 10 years, it's been remodeled. I think it's a wealth of information about the agency, the transparency that we promote. We also have YouTube videos. We have webinar training programs as well. But the first thing I always tell everyone is to go to that website, start plugging things in, and you'll be able to discover a wealth of information, as Dara mentioned, based upon who filed the complaint, who the respondent is, where the state is, things like that.
Our website, we've got great training materials on there as well.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you both, Commissioners Shana Broussard and Dara Lindenbaum, for all your comments, all your information, and also for getting us up to date about what's going on at the Federal Election Commission. And our time has expired, so I want to also thank our producer, Jody Mayer Piazza, and to the Holtzman Vogel Law Firm for its support of this program. Any opinions expressed here are those of the host and our guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors or their clients. All of our episodes are available on Buzzsprout as well as other podcast platforms. Thank you again, and I hope you will check those other episodes and have a good day.
Thanks for joining Early Returns, Law and Politics with Jan Baran. We hope you will join us for future episodes, which will continue to bring you voices and insights from the people engaged in our political landscape.